Emily Lancaster sat in the back corner of the waiting zone for patients scraping by without top-tier insurance, her worn jacket slung over a chair, a tattered tote resting by her feet, shadows under her eyes from nights spent awake in pain. A nurse strolling past shot her a look and murmured to a coworker, another one just sitting here expecting miracles. A doctor, his voice booming across the sterile space, called out, "She's got months to wait. No cash, no bed." Nobody suspected that this unassuming woman was married to the billionaire who'd built the region's biggest healthcare empire. At 39, Emily carried a quiet grace, her face bare of cosmetics, her hair pulled into a loose twist, strands escaping to frame her cheeks. The waiting zone buzzed with weary voices, chairs creaking under tired bodies, papers rustling in hands clutching faint hope. Her jeans faded at the seams and scuffed sneakers marked her as someone the staff could overlook. She didn't demand attention, didn't raise her voice, but the dismissal stung. A woman in a sleek coat waiting for her slot leaned toward her partner and hissed, "Why do they let people like her take up space?" Emily's hand stilled on her tote, but her expression stayed serene. She rose, guiding an old man with a cane to her seat, her tone gentle as she steadied his arm. The man's face softened, but the sleek-coated woman scoffed, turning away. This corner of the medical facility was a world apart where those with basic or no coverage languished while wealthier patients sailed through. Emily had been showing up for 3 months, her surgery a distant promise, her discomfort a silent companion. At the registration desk, a clerk with a shiny badge eyed her up and down as she asked about her status. "No fancy plan." "You're in for a long haul, sweetheart," the clerk said, her words sharp. A businessman nearby, his suit crisp, chuckled. They shouldn't let folks who can't pay clog the place up. Emily's knuckles paled as she gripped her tote, but she nodded, her voice even. "I'll keep checking." She stepped back, assisting a Vietnamese grandmother with her forms, her fingers pointing out each box. The grandmother's eyes shone with thanks, but the clerk's smirk lingered a barb in the air. As Emily returned to her seat, a group of patients waiting nearby began whispering, their voices loud enough to carry. A man in a tailored vest, his watch glinting, pointed at her tattered tote. "Look at that bag, bet it's stuffed with excuses, not cash," he said, his laugh harsh. The woman next to him, her nails painted crimson, joined in. She probably scavenged it from a dumpster. Their words drew chuckles from others, and Emily's fingers paused, brushing the tote's frayed edge, her lips tightening briefly. She didn't look their way. Instead, she knelt to pick up a dropped pacifier for a young mother struggling with her infant, handing it back with a soft, "Here you go." The mother's eyes softened, but the tailored vest's laughter rang out, the crimson nails cackle, a fresh wound, the air thick with their scorn. Emily's presence was a quiet anchor, her actions small but steady. She didn't push for special treatment, didn't snap at the jabs, but the cruelty landed hard, visible in the way her hand paused or her lips tightened. A young father wrestling with a fussy baby dropped his keys, and Emily scooped them up, handing them back with a soft, "You got this." The father's shoulders relaxed, but a man in a flashy tie muttered, "She's just loitering, wasting everyone's day." Emily's gaze flickered, but she didn't turn. She pulled a tissue from her tote, offering it to the baby, who grabbed it with a squeal. The waiting zone churned on, but the weight of judgment pressed heavier, each word a stone piling up. The facility's waiting zone was a grinding machine, spitting out hope in drips while dishing out scorn in heaps. Emily perched on a hard chair, her jacket folded neatly, her tote tucked under her seat. A cluster of aides by the water cooler traded glances, their voices low but cutting. "She's like a fixture now," one said, her ponytail bouncing. "Bet she's angling for a freebie." Her coworker snorted, sipping from a mug. "Yeah, dream on." A patient, a woman in a velvet scarf, caught the exchange and piped up, "If you can't afford care, don't expect VIP service." Emily's hand brushed her hair, twist tucking a stray lock, but her face held steady. She leaned over, helping an old woman open a snack bar, her touch light as she broke it in half. The woman's smile was frail but warm, though the aide's snickers echoed their words, "a fresh bruise." One morning, as Emily waited, a volunteer coordinator with a clipboard approached her, smile tight and insincere. "You're taking up a seat," she said loudly, drawing eyes from across the room. "If you're not scheduled, you need to step outside." The waiting patients murmured some, laughing openly. Emily looked up, her expression calm. "I'm waiting for my surgery," she said, her voice clear. The coordinator smirked, flipping her clipboard. "Sure, but we prioritize real patients, not lingerers." A man nearby, his cufflinks gleaming, laughed. She's probably here for the free coffee. Emily's hand rested on her chair, her knuckles whitening briefly, but she stood offering her seat to a limping teenager, her tone gentle as she helped him sit. The coordinator's smirk lingered, the cufflink's laugh a sharp sting, the room's coldness suffocating. Weeks bled into each other, and Emily's surgery stayed out of reach. She kept returning her tote over her shoulder, her pain trailing her steps. A junior physician paused by her chair one day, his tone flat. "No high-end coverage." "You're not top of the list," he said, eyes barely meeting hers. An aide nearby, sorting files, whispered, "She ought to try a free clinic. Wait's worse, though." The words landed like a punch, and Emily's fingers curled around her tote's strap, her breath catching. She nodded, her voice calm. "I'll wait." She turned, guiding a Vietnamese man through his discharge papers, her words patient as she explained each point. The man's gratitude was clear, but the physician's dismissal hung heavy, the space around her colder, sharper. As the physician walked away, a soft-spoken aide who'd seen Emily's kindness approached her, eyes hesitant but warm. "You're Ethan's mom, aren't you?" she said, clutching a notepad. "I told my supervisor how you help everyone here." Emily's gaze softened, her smile faint. "Just doing what I can," she said, her tone gentle. The aide nodded, stepping back, but her words lingered, a flicker of recognition in the gloom. Emily sat back down, assisting a young boy with a coloring sheet, her fingers guiding his pencil, her presence steady despite the earlier scorn. Later, she slipped a note into the feedback box, praising the aide's compassion, tucking in a small donation for the staff fund. Her actions quiet but deliberate, a spark of hope in the relentless grind. The waiting zone wove compassion through its cracks, unnoticed by most but vital to a few. Emily steadied a tray for a woman in a wheelchair, fetched a dropped pen for a rushed aide, or sat with a jittery patient nodding as they vented. But the staff saw her as a nuisance. One morning, a desk clerk with glossy nails called Emily forward, then laughed as she handed over a form. "Back for more." "You're a glutton for punishment," she said, her voice ringing out. A woman in a tailored blazer smirked. "Desperate's more like it." Emily's lips twitched, but she took the form, her grip firm. "Thanks," she said, her tone even. She sat, showing a young girl how to fold a paper star. Her fingers deft, despite the clerk's cackle. The blazer woman's sneer, a fresh wound. The space was a crucible, forging exhaustion from delays. Emily sat by a scuffed wall, her tote on her lap, complaints filling the air. A group of patients griped about wait times, their voices jagged. One, a man in a leather coat, jabbed a finger her way. "She's why we're stuck," he said, his tone venomous. "No coverage, no cash, just hogging chairs." A woman with gold hoops nodded, her voice harsh. "Find a charity ward or something." Emily's hand stilled on her tote, her knuckles paling. She rose, helping a Vietnamese teen adjust his crutches, her voice soft as she steadied him. The teen's smile was shy, but the leather coat's accusation lingered, the space shrinking the scorn. A heavy fog. During a busy afternoon, a ward supervisor stood at the front of the waiting area, reading out appointment updates to a restless crowd. She paused, her eyes landing on Emily, and her voice turned sharp. "Some people keep showing up thinking they'll jump the line," she said, pointing her pen at Emily. "This isn't a free ride." The crowd snickered, some clapping mockingly. Emily's fingers brushed her hair, twist her lips pressing together, but she didn't flinch. She stood, helping an elderly woman with a walker navigate to a water fountain, her tone gentle as she held her arm. The supervisor's words drew more laughs, the crowd's jeers a fresh blow, the air thick with contempt. A young patient nearby, watching Emily, whispered to his mother, "She's nicer than them." His voice low but clear, causing the supervisor to falter, her pen shaking slightly as she moved on. Her endurance was a quiet fire burning through months of neglect. She stood at the front desk one day, her hair twist fraying her jacket, damp from rain. An aide with a clipped tone scanned her file and sighed. "No premium plan." "You're not getting in soon," she said, her eyes flicking away. A patient in line, a woman in a silk shirt, muttered, "She's slowing everyone down." Emily's fingers brushed the desk, her hand trembling faintly. "I'll check back," she said, her voice unwavering though her eyes held weariness. She stepped aside, assisting a Vietnamese mother with her son's forms, her tone patient as she translated. The mother's gratitude was warm, but the aide's sigh followed her, the silk shirt's words a fresh cut. The corridors stretched on a labyrinth of sterile walls and blinking monitors. Emily waited one afternoon, her tote at her feet, when a physician in a rush knocked over her papers, a small drawing from her son fluttering out. "Move your stuff," he barked, striding past. An aide picked up the drawing, grinning cruelly. "Sweet picture. Too bad she's stuck in the slow lane." Patients chuckled, their laughter a blade. Emily's hand froze as she reached for the drawing, her breath hitching. She took it, her touch light, sliding it into her tote. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady, cutting through their mirths. She knelt, adjusting a blanket for an old man in a wheelchair. Her hands calm, though the aide's grin lingered, the room's coldness, a suffocating shroud. In the crowded waiting area, a patient advocate organizing a support group stood up to assign seats, her voice loud and commanding. She pointed at Emily, her smile mocking. "You back row, you're not here to contribute, just to sit," she said, drawing laughs from the group. "We need space for people who actually matter." The patient snickered, some whispering loudly. "She's just a freeloader." Emily's hand rested on her chair, her knuckles paling, but her face stayed composed. She stood, offering her seat to a pregnant woman struggling to stand, her tone soft as she helped her settle. The advocate's words sparked more laughter. The group's whispers a fresh wound, the air heavy with their disdain. A quiet nurse observing from the side approached Emily later, her voice low. "I saw what you did," she said, her eyes warm. "You're more than they think." Emily nodded, her smile faint, but kept assisting others, her actions a silent rebuke. The waiting zone was a battlefield, and Emily fought with resolve. She sat near a flickering light, her jacket draped over her chair, when a group of aides by the desk traded jabs, their voices loud. "She's like a stray cat, always here," one said, her badge flashing. "Thinks we're a free hotel." Another aide smirked, "More like a free ride." A patient, a woman in a cashmere wrap, joined in. She shouldn't expect handouts if she can't pay. Emily's fingers brushed her hair, smoothing a strand, but her expression stayed composed. She stood helping a young girl with a sling untangle her earbuds, her voice gentle as she asked about her school. The girl's grin was bright, but the aide's snickers rang out the cashmere wrap's words, a fresh scar. Her pain deepened, her nights sleepless, her body weakening. She stood at the desk one day, her hair twist loose, her jacket damp from a storm. An aide with a bored look scanned her file and shrugged. "No high-end plan." "You're months out, maybe more," she said, turning away. A patient behind her, a man in a wool coat, muttered, "She's blocking the line." Emily's fingers brushed her form, her hand shaking faintly. "I'll keep coming," she said, her voice firm, though her eyes betrayed exhaustion. She stepped back, assisting a Vietnamese grandfather with his appointment card, her tone patient, as she translated. The grandfather's smile was warm, but the aide's shrug lingered, the wool coat's words a fresh wound. One evening, as Emily sat translating for a Vietnamese family, a senior nurse overseeing the ward's schedule walked by, her clipboard raised. "You're still here," she said, her voice dripping with disdain, loud enough for the room to hear. "You're clogging up our system, taking time from patients who can pay." The waiting patients laughed, some pointing at Emily, their voices cruel. "Go beg somewhere else," a woman in a fur shawl called out. Emily's hand paused on the family's form, her pen trembling, but she didn't look up. She continued translating, her voice steady, guiding the family through each line. The nurse's words drew more jeers, the fur shawl's taunt a fresh blow, the room's coldness crushing. A young boy nearby, watching Emily, slipped her a small drawing of a flower, whispering, "You're nice." Emily tucked it into her tote, her smile faint, the boy's kindness, a quiet spark in the darkness. Her body betrayed her, a fever surging, landing her in a cramped ward, her tote beside her bed. A physician stood over her, his tone harsh. "If a critical case comes in, she's out," he said to an aide, his voice carrying. A patient nearby, a woman with a gold necklace, sneered, "No money, no priority." Emily's hand rested on her tote, her fingers trembling from the heat. She turned to a young girl in the next bed, offering a tissue, her voice faint. "You okay, sweetheart?" The girl nodded, but the physician's words hung heavy, the ward's coldness a vice around her chest. The fever burned hotter, Emily's vision blurring, her breath shallow. She lay in the ward, her hair twist, unraveling, her tote within reach. A group of aides stood nearby, their voices sharp. "She's low priority," one said, checking her chart. "We'll deal with her later." A patient, a man with a slick tie, chuckled. "Probably milking it for a free bed." Emily's fingers twitched, her lips parting, but no sound came. She reached for a water cup, offering it to an old woman coughing nearby, her hand shaking. "Need this?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The woman's eyes were grateful, but the aide's words echoed the slick tie's chuckle, a fresh wound. During a ward round session, a head physician addressing the staff stopped by Emily's bed, his voice booming to impress his team. "This one's a charity case," he said, gesturing at her with a sneer. "Don't waste resources on someone who can't contribute." The patients nearby laughed, one woman in a pearl brooch calling out, "She's just leeching off the system." Emily's hand trembled on her blanket, her lips silent but her eyes flickered with pain. She leaned over, adjusting a pillow for an elderly man struggling to sit up, her touch gentle, despite her fever. The physician's words sparked more laughter. The pearl brooch's taunt a fresh scar, the ward's cruelty suffocating. A quiet janitor mopping nearby paused, leaning toward a colleague. "That's the lady who funded our new clinic wing," he whispered, his colleague's eyes widening, unnoticed by the jeering crowd. Her world narrowed to pain, her consciousness fading. She lay still, her tote at her side, her breathing uneven. A physician, his tone clipped, stood over her, his chart in hand. "She's not urgent," he said to an aide. "Paying patients come first." A patient nearby, a woman with a ruby ring, muttered, "She's just dragging this out." Emily's hand trembled, her fingers brushing her tote, her lips silent. She squeezed a young boy's hand in the next bed, offering a small toy from her tote. "For you," she whispered, her smile faint. The boy grinned, but the physician's words lingered, the ward's cruelty, a suffocating fog. The new director arrived at dawn, his suit sharp, his expression grave. He moved through the wards on an unannounced inspection, his team trailing their notepads untouched. He paused at Emily's bed, his gaze locking on her pale face, her uneven breaths, her tote by her side. The ward hushed, aides freezing, patients watching. His jaw tightened, and he turned to the lead physician, his voice low, commanding. "Get her to the top care suite." "Immediately." The physician's face drained, his hands fumbling, but he nodded, rushing to obey. Aides exchanged wide-eyed looks, their earlier dismissals a bitter echo. The director stood firm, his hand on the bed rail, his authority, a quiet storm. The care suite's doors swung open. Emily wheeled in, her tote carried by a shaken aide. The director followed his steps, measured, his face stern. The lead physician, his voice trembling, asked, "Why her, sir?" The director's eyes stayed on Emily, his tone cutting. "You have no idea who she is." The ward erupted in whispers, aides and patients leaning in, their faces ashen. Emily was the spouse of the billionaire who'd founded the region's vast healthcare system, whose charity funded countless salaries, who'd endured their neglect to test their ethics. The aide who'd mocked her bed space dropped her pen, her hands shaking. The ruby-ringed woman turned away, her face burning. In the care suite, as Emily's fever began to break, a ward clerk who'd seen her kindness approached, her hands clutching a folder. "You're the one who saved our pediatric unit," she said, her voice trembling, holding out a thank you note signed by dozens of staff. The room hushed, patients and aides watching, their faces pale. Emily's fingers brushed the note, her smile faint, and she handed it back. "It's for the kids," she said, her tone soft. The clerk nodded, stepping back, her eyes shining. The woman with the pearl brooch, overhearing, fumbled her purse, its contents spilling her earlier scorn, now a bitter memory, the air thick with awe. The facility's response was immediate, almost frantic. The director convened an urgent meeting, his voice unwavering. "Equal care for every patient, no exceptions," he declared, his gaze sweeping the room. The board held a press conference, their expressions solemn, announcing reforms, no bias triage suspensions for unethical staff, equal access for all. Headlines blazed, from waiting room to boardroom, the woman who transformed healthcare. Emily received unmatched treatment, her strength creeping back. She didn't boast, didn't demand reckoning. She lay quietly, her tote nearby, her hair retwisted, her eyes calm as the facility reshaped itself. Her influence spread like wildfire, touching every corner. Aides who'd seen her kindness were elevated, their ideas shaping policy. Patients she'd aided felt the shift, their care swifter, their dignity restored. One day the soft-spoken aide visited Emily's suite, her voice cracking. "You changed it all," she said, clutching a notepad. Emily's smile was faint, her hand on her tote. "We all did," she said, her tone steady. The aide stepped back, her eyes shining. Emily turned to a young girl in the next bed, offering a crayon, her smile warm, her presence an anchor in a transformed facility. The staff who'd scorned her faced consequences, firm but quiet. The physician who'd dismissed her urgency was sidelined his career under scrutiny. The aide who'd mocked her presence was sent to retraining her badge, gone. The socialite with the gold necklace saw her reputation crumble online, her gala invites drying up. The businessman with the cufflinks lost a deal with the healthcare network, his arrogance a liability. Emily didn't chase these outcomes. She focused on patients, her compassion unwavering, her voice steady as she crafted a community care ethics program, her signature bold. Emily's recovery was gradual, her strength returning as the facility evolved. She walked the wards in a simple sweater, her tote over her shoulder, patients' faces brightening their hands, reaching out. One evening she sat with a Vietnamese elder explaining her discharge plan, her voice patient, her smile warm. The elder's eyes glistened, clasping Emily's hands. "You're a light," she said, trembling. Emily shook her head, her hair twist swaying. "Just a mom," she said, her tone gentle. She rose, guiding the elder to her wheelchair, her steps steady, her influence woven into every fairer interaction. The city felt her impact, the reforms a beacon. Patients once sidelined saw specialists sooner, their care equal, their voices heard. The ethics program became a model studied nationwide, rooted in Emily's quiet fight. She didn't seek fame. She went home, her tote on her shoulder, her sedan in the driveway, her steps light. David waited on the porch, his smile warm. Ethan ran to her, his arms wide, his laughter a melody. Emily hugged him, her touch gentle, her heart full. Her silence had been the spark, her kindness the fuel. Sometimes the softest steps leave the deepest tracks. Sometimes grace outshines cruelty. Emily walked inside, Ethan's hand in hers, David's arm around her. The night was calm, the stars clear, and she was home. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.